Hi, Giselle.
Hello.
I'm really happy that you came. I know we tried to do this a few times before, and you and I met at PRTS in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember exactly how long ago or what month that was. And we were talking about translation. I think David Woolen had wanted us to meet and talk about a new translation that had been done.
Mm.
What do you recall what project that was?
I was the little booklet. It's called "Developing a Healthy Prayer Life" by Dr. Joe R. Pickey and James Pickey, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's a fascinating story from what I recall, because you weren't actually the lead translator on that, were you?
No.
Yeah. So fill us in a bit about the backstory of how this book landed on your desk, because you've done Chinese or translation from English to Chinese,
Mm-hmm.
but what made this project different?
Right. So it actually started with one of our young men from our Chinese fellowship group. He did the first draft all by himself, and then he presented that to David Woolen for him to check, and then David Woolen passed that one to me and said, "Can you help review this?"
So the first time you ever heard about this book was when David said, "Hey, so this guy translated this text?"
Yes.
And he did it completely on his own time and idea.
Yeah, I think he spent maybe a summer on this. Don't quote me, but I think he spent his vacation days on this from school. Yeah, and then he emailed it to David Woolen. I had no idea that he was doing this, so that was really interesting.
But it sounds, I think, recalling our conversation from before, translation is not as easy as like Duolingo-ish stuff.
No, definitely not.
There's a real skill set required.
Right.
It's a lot more work than, well, this word goes to that word, and I can just put it into Google Translate. What was it about his translation that that came out of nowhere, that you appreciated, but also thought, maybe this needs a bit of help? I mean, what was your first reaction when you started reading the manuscript?
My first reaction was that it was a good translation, but because it was his first effort in translating, I believe so, a bit bookish, if I can use that word. In translation, we call it translating accent, or so you can tell it's a translation work. So the Chinese part is not as authentic as the Chinese language is. It's more, you can tell the English sentence structure from the Chinese translation. So a lot of that elements.
So is it merely to do with syntax, or is it also word choice?
More syntax from his translation. But word choices wise, it would be more on the theological content in that book. It's his first attempt to do it. So maybe some of the theological vocabulary wasn't as consistent as all the other Chinese already translated Chinese works. So that needs a little polish up.
Yeah. Is there much of a synergy between, let's say, the English lexicon of theological terms compared to Chinese?
We're actually trying to create one at Puritan, but some people have already worked on several Chinese English dictionary or theological dictionary. Some publishers have already published a few dictionaries like that.
Yeah, my question stems from the fact, just given the history of the two countries and the languages themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, the Reformation wasn't done in English, and the vast majority of the church wasn't in English either. And yet, we have, for example, here at Reformation Heritage Books, we publish a lot of Puritan reprints. So at least capital R Reformed Christianity went through that period of prolificity, I guess we would say, of theological thinking and writing to vast output. Whereas the Chinese language didn't have that Puritan period or the Reformation, and what came after that. And yet China has had a long theological history, but in a different way. Would that be accurate to say?
I'm not an expert on this, so yeah.
So when I say theological, I don't mean Christian.
Okay.
I mean the Chinese, like all people throughout the history of the world, have pondered the existence of God, the meaning of, or the problem of evil.
Yeah.
These basic issues that, let's just call it, religion tries to get at. And yet it's been a different history.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So why then does the Chinese language, it seems to, from what you're saying, lack certain terms? Is it a lack of the actual terminology? Is it a lack of clarity? Is it just the absence of a history? Why is it that there's a need for theological dictionaries for the Chinese language?
I'm sure there are many reasons to that. One of the reasons is that there aren't many of them. So it's nice to have a place you can go that has a compiled list of all those terms instead of it's all scattered. You have to go to different sources to find them. So it's nice to have a place you can go with. Maybe some of them are already translated. So it's not like they didn't exist and you're making one. It's just you have a place to put them together. That's one of the reasons. But when we're translating from English to Chinese, because some of the theological terms, like for English, or in English, for example, some of those terms are translated from other languages too, or some of the terms are just invented or created in English. So they come from different sources.
Yeah.
So for those terms, whether they have a Chinese translation existing or not, we have to decide where that, depending on how that term comes into being. So all those different elements we have to think about. And sometimes we do have to create a Chinese word. Like for the Chinese Bible, for example, the Chinese Bible has in the translation, the Chinese translation, it has created a few words that if you're not a Christian, when the first time you hear it, you don't know what it means. Like sanctification. Yeah. The Chinese word is 成圣. So that's a word a non-believer wouldn't understand the first time they heard it. At least not understanding it the way that the Bible presents it. So you have to explain a little bit. Like justification, that word too. Yeah.
Well, true. I would say, though, that even, let's say, contemporary America, there's people who you say the word sanctification and they probably have no reference point for that. But what about other, because sanctification and justification, we can find those in Scripture. But what about these other extra biblical terms like supralapsarianism or something?
Right.
Perhaps built upon a Latin prefix and suffix and whatnot, but we don't find that term in the Bible.
Right.
How do you address those in your work as a translator?
Yeah. So at first I would do some research, see if someone has already translated it, and then decide if that's a good translation. Some of those terms, I can't think of one now, but some of the terms have been translated for and accepted by almost every Chinese Christian. So those terms, sometimes even if it's not the best translation, we would still use it just for the sake of familiarity. And then, but there are other terms that maybe just one or two people have translated it, and then if it's not the best one and we can think of a better one, then we will change it. Yeah. Sometimes there's no existed translation available, then we'll just see if we can create one ourselves. Chinese language is very interesting. It's character based, and each character, most of the characters, it has its own meaning. So it's very fun to try to create a word if we couldn't find exist translation.
You said fun. That's interesting. So it's kind of like artistic in a way that you get to create new characters.
Yeah, but not create new characters, create a new term based on your understanding of the characters.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you have an example?
I don't know off the top of my head.
You keep referring to we.
Yeah.
Is that just a polite way of referring to the work that you do, or is this work of translation actually quite a collaborative thing?
You mean at Puritan or
just the work you've done as a translator?
Okay, yeah, I do say we a lot.
No, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm just curious whether, for example, you come across a word and you think, and you've done your research, and you can't find an equivalent in Chinese that's been either created or existed before. And you think, okay, I need to make a term
right
for this.
Yeah.
That's where I'm wondering, is it kind of a group discussion with you and some other translators? How do you come about to finally make that term? And then the question would be, and then how do you get the word out about that word to others? So, hey, when you come across this, by the way, we or me have decided that this is probably the best way to render it.
Right. So in my own work, I don't believe that I have come to a point that I need to create a term. I've always found some existed translation available, but I have had discussions with others about things I'm not working on. They would come to me about do you think this is a good translation? Maybe we can translate differently, and then we would just discuss that, and then I would come up with a word, but it's not an official work that I would do. So it's not,
okay.
Yeah. But I think the reason I said way is because I have done some study on translation, read some other people's books and textbooks, and for the translation, made MA in translation in universities and stuff. I found it's not just me who practice this in this way. Other people have taught that there are several ways that you can go when you come across a term that you don't know if you should use an existed translation or create a new one. So I guess that's why I said way, because it's not just me doing this. I think other people are doing this too. Yeah.
Whether or not you're sitting in the same room together.
Right.
There's a network, as it were.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that network. Is it loosely connected as people just come to you ad hoc as they need to? Or is there a society of Chinese translators? What does it look like? And are you all ultimately going towards that same goal, whatever that goal is, of just disseminating certain literature to the Chinese reader?
Yeah. So our Chinese fellowship group in Grand Rapids, in our church, we have established this translation fellowship group. It's called Old Path Translation Fellowship. This is outside of the seminary. It's outside PRTS. So we have established this group with the goal of translating a lot of our very good Reformed literature, Christian literature, into Chinese. But we also think that we need more good translators. good translators people don't become good translators overnight. So what we have done is we have done some training sessions. We only had 4, and it's just a beginning. And now we're having a summer break, and then in the fall we'll resume our training session. So hopefully, we've had quite at least a dozen people who were there for all 4 translation sessions. So hopefully they will go through all these training sessions, and then because each book has its own difficulty level, like if you translate a children's book, it's going to be different than translating Dr. Beaky's systematic theology. So each of those students or translators, they can pick their own project that they want to work on, and they will go through a translation trial to prove that they can do this work, and then they can start translating. Yeah. So hopefully our goal is to translate more Christian literature, but to achieve that goal, we need good translators. That's why we're doing training sessions, for this translation fellowship.
How many books have you yourself worked on and translated?
So just that book, Developing Healthy Prayer Life. Yeah, because the bulk of my work is at the seminary in translating lectures, our theological lectures.
Okay.
So not books.
Okay.
So yeah.
Is there a big difference apart from size doing a lecture versus a book?
There is a difference. First of all, your source, like when people write and when they lecture, it's different. The lecture part is you're speaking. When you're writing, you think more thoroughly about your sentence, and you write long sentences. When you speak, you rarely do that. So the source, that's the source language. It's the difficulty level is going to be different. And when you present it to others, because for a lecture, what we do at the seminary, we translate the lecture transcript into Chinese, and then we insert that into the video as subtitles, and then we would have someone to do a voiceover. So that's the end product of it. It's a video lecture. So it's in lecture form. But a book, it's presented to others in Word. So the presenting format would kind of affect how you would translate that as well. Yeah.
That's very interesting, because I was going to ask you about the how we call it, the genre of translation,
right?
Meaning the final translation is. You had said in the very beginning that the translation you received from this young man was good but bookish, versus kind of a more, I guess, more natural sense of writing. But and I'm asking you this question because we had Sharif in here a few weeks ago, and he talked about how Egyptian has like a spoken and then a written form, and they're quite different from each other. And do you have the same situation in Chinese, where there's the spoken Chinese, but then there's a much more formal written Chinese?
Yeah, so the written Chinese is much more formal than spoken Chinese.
Okay. And how does that affect your work as a translator then?
Yeah, about word choices mainly. Yeah.
Word choices.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of the words, if you, I think, but for the seminary lectures, because the professors, the content of the lectures are quite theological. So the word choices, the difference isn't that great. But for example, if we're having a conversation and I need to translate our conversation, there are some words I probably would choose a much simpler word than a very formal words, because we would know that people during a conversation, a casual conversation, they wouldn't use that word.
Yeah.
They would use it in writing, but not when they are speaking casually. Yeah. So we do have that in Chinese too. But I think in English, you have this too, right?
Yeah. I remember when I was in seminary, I had this opportunity, which I say that half sarcastically, where one of our faculty was looking for someone to transcribe his sermons. And in exchange, he would meet with that person once a week, just kind of like as a mentorship. And I really respected him. I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity. I can type fast. It was like the most laborious thing I've ever done in my life, because I can type fast, but not as fast as someone talks without making lots of errors.
Right.
And there were moments where I couldn't understand what was being said. And I think after 2 sermons, I was like, I'm sorry, I just can't do this anymore. It's too much work. Because it wasn't like, no, this is very different than translating, but it wasn't like copying out written text. There, as I'm sure you experience with the lectures, there's so many ums and ohs and repetition and informality that made it very, very challenging.
Yes.
Especially because, and I'm sure you experience this in the lectures, someone will start a thought and then they almost kind of like reset to go a different trajectory with the idea. And then they reset again because, oh, actually, I'm going to say this using an analogy instead. And so you don't end up with a clear, clean sentence at all.
Right.
You almost kind of want to delete things out and just get to that thing they finally ended up on.
Right.
That statement.
Right.
So I could imagine the work you're doing with these lectures at times can be a bit challenging.
Yeah. So those parts are challenges for the transcribers, to get the lectures from the video form into word form. So as for the translators, we get the transcripts, which have already been worked on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We smoothed out a little bit. I did the transcribing work in the beginning for a little bit. Now we have someone else to do it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I experienced all of that you have just mentioned. Yeah. I would go to the professor and ask for, clarification.
Oh, good.
Did you mean this? Did you mean that? Yeah. Because we all experience that as we talk, right? It's so different than writing. And then when you write, you have drafts, first draft, second draft, and you go back and review and edit it. But when you're talking, you just, you don't get that opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the work that you do presently.
Yeah. Or presently, I'm more reviewing the translations that we receive from others.
And how many other transcribers do you have supporting or like doing the groundwork that you review?
So we have one transcriber working for us for all the courses, because we're translating our courses not only into Mandarin Chinese and also into other languages to Arabic. I don't know if I have mentioned this, but the translators, we outsourced some of our translations to different translators or translating agencies. And then when they're done with their work, I would do the editing part.
Okay.
Yeah. So we didn't hire them or they're not working full-time for Puritan. We just outsourced those projects to them. Yeah.
I could foresee some issues there.
Yeah.
Well, depending on the agency you contract with, there may be a unfamiliarity perhaps with theological terms, or are there agencies that actually specialize in more theological Christian work?
Yeah, so we have done some work to prevent those issues from happening. So we have our terminology lists. We have quite a few of theological terms and proper names. And we also have them do translation test. So to make sure that it's actually good translation, they're going to do a good job before outsourcing.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So we just received a completed translation work from one of the agencies, and they did a good job. They are Christians. They translate Christian literatures. They have done a lot, so we know they're good. Yeah.
And how long have you been doing this work for POTS?
The translation work, or
all of this work around taking lectures and moving them to the final product.
On and off for 4 years, on and off, because sometimes I have some other projects coming up in the middle, so I have to
So you do a lot of reading of lectures.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, you've received probably 2 MDivs by now.
1 MA, or we don't do MDiv for female at the seminary.
No, I know. I'm joking. I'm saying you've taken all the lectures now at least once.
Yeah.
Having had to read through these.
Yeah, I actually love that part.
I bet.
Yeah, I love that part. Yeah.
Let's go back now, because we've talked about where you're at right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to hear some of your backstory.
Sure.
Kind of where it all began. So tell us, where did it start? Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in China, mainland China.
What part?
In the southwest, Chongqing city. That's a big city. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No.
You know Sichuan province?
No.
Sichuan. You know where the pandas? That's where the pandas are.
Okay.
You know Tibet, right? Tibet, you must know.
So you're near Tibet.
Not super close, but in that area. Tibet is in southwest. So Chongqing is also in southwest. Okay. Yeah. It's a big city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when were you first exposed to Christianity? Was it through your parents or?
No, later. A full exposure to it would be here in the States. So I came here about 10 years ago, 2013, and then in that summer. And then at the end of that year, my roommate back then, she was on a Sunday morning, she was watching a sermon online from a local evangelical broader evangelical church. And then she invited me to watch it with her. That was my first exposure to a sermon. I never heard of a sermon before. And then in that sermon, that pastor quoted Paul's passage saying that he has learned to be content in different kinds of circumstances. And that got me interested because I was teaching in an elementary school back then, and it was a very stressful job, and I wasn't feeling content at all. And then that pastor mentioned Paul wrote this when he was in prison, and I thought, this guy, he was in a much worse situation than me, but how could he be content? I wanted to know what this is about. So I started going to that church by myself. My roommate wasn't even going. So that's my first exposure to Christianity. Yeah, in that church. I actually went there for 2 years. I was baptized there. I thought I became a Christian, but later on I realized I was just a nominal Christian. Yeah, for 2 years I went there. Yeah.
So you had no exposure to Christianity or sermons or anything for, well, I don't know how many years it was, but your whole life up until coming to the States.
Right. I've heard of the word Christian before, or Christ.
In China.
In China, yeah. We actually had a neighbor, like downstairs. We live on the 4th floor in the apartment building. We had a neighbor downstairs. They said that they were Christians. They actually gave us a Bible, I think. We had it somewhere in our house, but I never read it. I never gave a second thought to it. Yeah. So I would say a more serious exposure to it would be here in the States. Yeah.
So did you have any form of religion or faith during your time in China?
Not really. So the government of our formal education would be atheism. So there's no God, no savior. So that would be a lot of Chinese people. They would say they were atheists. But I don't think I was even an atheist. I did believe there are some spirits-ish things. But I just don't know. I didn't know if there is a God. I didn't know if what all those... I did believe there were spirits, but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what happens after death. So I didn't know how to interpret all those stories that I heard from people regarding things that are spiritual. So I wasn't an atheist, but I don't know. I don't know what I was.
Does China have a fairly robust mythological tradition that maybe that's where these stories you were hearing made you think there has to be something more than just nothing?
Right. So we did have a lot of legendary stories or mythological stories, but I don't know how serious people took them. It's more like stories. So it's not those stories I was referring to. It's more like real stories people share with me, like from family members or friends, something they experienced, but you cannot explain it with science, so-called science or facts or physics.
Right.
Yeah. So those stories, like I believed them. There's no reason for them to lie about it. They know they're going to be received by people with criticism or, doubt, but they still, because they experienced them. So all those stories, I heard them, I believed them, but I don't know how to, think about them. Yeah. So I wasn't an atheist. I feel like I knew there's something out there. I just didn't know what it was.
So this is really interesting. So then you become a Christian. And in reflecting back on those stories, what changed in your thinking? So through the lens now of the Christian faith,
right.
understanding there is a spiritual realm,
right?
Did those stories, I guess the bigger question is, were you able to then look back at your upbringing, your childhood, being raised and living a good portion of your life in China? Was there a reinterpretation that happened?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I can't speak for all of those stories that I heard, but some of them, I think it's safe to interpret that it's the devil's work or some demonic presence.
So these were more negative experiences that people had?
Yeah. Like, for example, in China, sometimes when one of your relatives passed away, people would hire how to say it in English? In Chinese we call it a 道士, like a Taoist person, the
Taoists.
Yeah, so they would hire someone to come to your house, and I don't know what they do, but they will tell you about this time, like from midnight to 4 a.m. this person's spirit will come back. So make sure nobody will be at home. And then they would spread some flour on the floor, or prepare this person's favorite meal, put it on the table, whatever. And then, because it has happened to people I know, they would leave their house, and then when they come back, there are footprints on those flour that they spread on the floor, and then the chopsticks that they used put on the table were moved or put on the bowl, whatever. And I've heard one man who didn't believe that Taoist master, and then he said, "Oh, I'm not leaving. I'm staying here." And then at midnight, something was making a noise in the kitchen. He just fled his house. So those stories, yeah. So looking back on those stories, I do believe there is a demonic presence there, at least to make people believe. When you experience that, you would believe, anything that makes you believe anything other than Christianity, I believe it's a demonic presence. Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is.
But it makes me wonder, is this still prevalent in China today?
Yeah, quite. I mean, I don't know about the younger generations, if they still do that, but at least the older generation, a lot of them do that.
I would almost think that with the advent of technology, well, I would say modern technology and social media and whatnot, the enemy has other ways to distract us.
Definitely.
It's almost as though these legends and myths and fairy tales of the past that may have, this is just speculation.
Yeah.
Just don't hold me to it, everyone. Is that maybe there were things actually happening that were quite horrific and frightening and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe the devil doesn't need those as much anymore.
No.
He has other ways to take our eyes off of Christ, off of our triune, the reality of the triune God who is king of all, right?
Right. I think that's one of the reasons. Like, if this happens, it's more prevalent in the rural area than city area. It's more prevalent in poorer countries than the more advanced countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's sort of like the witch doctor, the spiritists, the exorcists, these types that flourished in the past. They're still active.
Yeah, they are.
Wow. So what was the catalyst for you to decide, I want to go to the United States? Like what was it maybe about your situation in China that you were unsatisfied with? Was there a promise that America offered? Did you intend to go back? Like, what brought you here and kept you here?
So what brought me here 10 years ago? I was doing a program in MSU, Michigan State University, because my undergrad study in China was teaching Chinese as a second language.
So you learned you learned English quite proficiently in China.
Yeah.
To prepare for that.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Or you thought you did.
I thought I didn't, but yeah. Because that was my undergrad study. So, like in the U.S., you have some schools that would offer like a Chinese immersion program. So they need Chinese teachers, and that's what my undergrad education was for. So I did this program from a master program from Michigan State that allows you to do a master on education, but also at the same time you can teach in a school setting for as a full-time teacher for 3 years. So I thought that was excellent because you not only get the theory in education, you actually are practicing it and learning all those experiences.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were there many other students doing this program with you and from other language backgrounds?
My cohort was all Chinese teachers. Okay. So I don't know if they do this with other languages at MSU, but my cohort was Chinese teachers. But looking back, it's really amazing how I ended up in Grand Rapids, because for my cohort, we would be interviewed by different schools looking for Chinese teachers. So we were sent to different cities. Most of them in Michigan, but some of them are even out of state. But I ended up in Grand Rapids, and there are so many churches here in Grand Rapids. I believe God brought me here to Grand Rapids, and then where He eventually led me to Himself. Of all those places I could go, He brought me here to Grand Rapids. Yeah.
Okay, so let me get the timeline correct. So you moved to, because I want to drill down on that, but first I'm a bit unclear on when. So you moved in 2013.
2013, yeah.
And you did this 3-year program?
Yeah, so I moved
in Lansing,
I moved here in 2013 summer, and for 2 months I was in Lansing doing like intensive courses. But because of this program's, the setup of this program, they don't keep you in Lansing for the whole 3 years. Okay. We will do our courses online. So that summer in August, I moved here to Grand Rapids and started. So I was doing my courses online, but work as a full-time teacher.
So why Grand Rapids of all places then?
That's where the school, I got an interview from Forest Hills Public Schools.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Who picked you up? Who hired you on? So it was Forest Hills Public Schools.
Yeah.
And so you were working there as a
Chinese teacher. Yeah.
Okay. And then, but it was while you were here in Grand Rapids that your roommate was watching that sermon.
Yes.
Was your roommate Chinese as well?
No. She, I think she retired now, but she was a teacher at the same school that I was teaching in. And then I rented a room from her house. Actually, it's right next to that school. Okay. So it's her house. But yeah, she was watching a sermon online.
Okay.
Yeah, eating cereals.
Yeah, paint the picture for me. We remember those moments very clearly.
Yeah, I have that picture here on her counter. Like she was has her laptop right in front of her, eating cereals, and asked me if I wanted to join her. Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Because it's amazing how the memory works, isn't it? Because I grew up in a Christian household, and my mom actually had me when they had just started attending Grace Community Church in Los Angeles. Okay. So John MacArthur's church. And that was back in the 70s. And many years later, I was newly married. Hadn't really been living a life of faith. And my wife and I were in Brazil visiting her family for the first time. And we had planned to spend a week in, where was it? Sao Paulo. She's from Rio, but we were visiting her other family in Sao Paulo. Well, that family had this beautiful loft apartment, and we got very, very sick, like flu sick or something. And for a whole week, we were just bedridden, my wife and I. And her family they still had to do their thing out and about with the kids and all that. And I don't even remember how it happened, but I happened to, just be on my computer, and a YouTube video popped up of John MacArthur, who was my old pastor, and I hadn't watched a sermon from John for years and years and years. And there was this instant kind of nostalgia, but my point is I can remember the smell of the Sao Paulo humid street. I can remember the color of the tiles on the floor. I can remember the feel of the blanket. It's so tactile for me.
Yeah.
That moment.
Yeah.
Being there. I can remember even the picture that was on the calendar on the wall. Because that, in my understanding of the Lord's journey in my life, that was a real turning point that led my wife and I to really turn things around. We were newly married. That was critical at that timing for us. But the picture is so clear of that moment in time. And there's all those little details you forget.
Yeah.
What happened the day before. I have no idea. I don't remember. I don't even remember what happened the next day.
Yeah.
But I remember that moment.
Yeah.
So probably till I die, I will never forget that moment.
Yeah.
So
sometimes when you smell that smell again, it brings you back to that moment. Sometimes it works the other way too. Not only when we think about that moment, remember the smell. And sometimes if we smell that smell again, then our memory would come back too.
Yeah, it just kicks right back on. I can even see, I remember, I think it was those famous MacArthur interviews on Larry King Live, where John there's no compromise. This is the gospel.
Yeah.
No matter what anyone says, this is truth. I remember how impactful that was for me at that time, because for I think the past decade, I had just been kind of wandering. And here was a man who, whether you agree with John's theology in every aspect or not, he was someone who had conviction and he had courage. And God, in his providence, allowed me to see that at the time that I absolutely needed it. When it was kind of like, okay, now it's your time.
Oh.
So you remember the cereal.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a turning point. And then you said for the next couple years.
2 years.
2 years, you were going there by yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Every Sunday morning,
Every Sunday
I think.
morning.
Yeah.
So what then led to you coming over to PRTS? Was there anything in between Forest Hills and PRTS? And what did that journey look like?
Right. So the serial event happened at the end of 2013. And then I have started going to that church for the next 2 years. So around the end of 2015, I met this Chinese group from my current church, Heritage Reformed Congregation. So they were, I got invited to a Thanksgiving dinner that they were having. They actually hosted it in the cafeteria at the seminary. So I got to know them, and then I started going to their Bible study. And after going to their Bible study for a few times, I asked them, what church do you guys go to? And then they told me, oh, HRC. And then I invited myself to HRC Sunday morning service. And right after that service, I went home and cried for a whole week, just repenting of sin. That was my conversion. So the 2 years that I went to this other church, I was baptized there. I think I mentioned this. But I was more I was just a nominal Christian. But after that sermon from HRC, yeah, that was my conversion. And then, so that's at the end of 2016. So half a year later, in the summer of 2016, I applied at PRTS and then got accepted and started right away studying. Yeah. What was
the difference for you? And you don't need to name the broadly evangelical church,
right?
Unless you want to call them out.
I'm good.
Or, good, yeah, don't say that. What was the difference, or some of the differences that you experienced and saw that led to? You did mention the sermon, but were there other things that kind of, upon entry, you thought, this is different, and apparently has kept you there since?
Right. So obviously my memory is fallible, right? So I don't, but this is what I remember from the other church. It's more a moralistic teaching, I would say, from my memory. Maybe because I wasn't regenerated, I didn't pick up more on the other things maybe they have preached about. But like, for example, the first sermon that I heard online from them, the pastor mentioned Paul's being content. I don't remember him saying why Paul was content, because Paul said after all those description, because Christ. So I don't remember that part. It's more the part focusing on Paul's being content. And then I remember another sermon series on also being content, like go back home and, see how many clothes you have, and then if you don't use them, donate them and stuff like that. Learn to be content, to be thankful. So a lot of those kind of teaching, but I don't remember a lot of teaching on sin, on repentance, on our need for a savior. So I actually don't remember what the first sermon from Heritage was about. Like, I don't remember the outline, I don't remember, but I remember the focus on the need for a savior from our sin, for repentance. So I remember that part. And I went home and then just cried for a whole week. Yeah, over my sin. And then also being very thankful that Christ would save someone like me. Yeah, so I guess that's more the difference. I remember also before attending that sermon, when I went to the Bible study with the Chinese group, I love to ask questions. One time I gave them a list of questions that they actually divided into 4 groups and had 4 seminary students. Each one of them take a group and then come and answer my questions. So, but I remember what struck me from that Chinese group is when they answer my questions, they pull out their Bible and say, let's see what God's word says about this. But before, when I went to the other church, I also asked a lot of questions with whoever I met. But a lot of them just gave me their answers. And a lot of those answers conflict with each other. So it's not even the same answer from every one of them. It's different answers about the same questions. And that got me very confused. Like maybe you don't even know what this is about. But from the Chinese group, they take God's word out and tell me, see, this is what God's word said about this. And that gives me a sense of finality. Like, okay, that's it. There's no higher authority than this. So I would say those are the differences, like the reference for God's word and put it to see the authority of it above us, and also the preaching of the gospel and our need for a savior. Yeah.
Yeah, some of the classic tenets of Reformed churches in the best sense of the tradition. We moved here a year and a few months ago, and I've said this on other episodes of the podcast, or at least versions of the story, but we gave ourselves a year to find a church, and it wasn't easy. Like you mentioned yourself that the Lord brought you to Grand Rapids. There was all these churches.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of churches, but we experienced that as well, that time and again, and we visited dozens of churches over the past years.
Right.
There's unfortunately this trend towards superficial moralistic sermons that for some strange reason must end with a call to come to Jesus without ever having told me who he is.
Right.
Like, apart from the classic terms of friend, savior, kind of these overplayed terms that they're true and they're biblical. And yet we're missing out on this vast ocean of the true attributes, names, and nature of the second person of the Trinity. And not only that, but we haven't really even talked about the other 2 members of the Trinity.
No.
And I fear that the church, this is just my experience with the church today, for the normal person in the pew is just not hearing or learning and therefore not being able to go home and meditate upon and ultimately serve our triune God in all the ways that he reveals himself to us, again, in his word.
Right.
And instead we're told to look at ourselves, not even corporately, but individually.
Right.
And fix it.
Right.
Ask Jesus to fix you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which, again, there's an aspect of the gospel that's part of that fixing, but there's so much more.
Yeah. Our faith is a relationship with God, and then we don't learn who God is. We don't know who God is. We don't. How can we form a relationship? Like, this is on a human level too, right? If I want to introduce you to a friend, I tell you about this friend. That's how you form a relationship with someone. It's a relationship, interpersonal relationship. Yeah, our faith is the relationship. Yeah.
I was reading an author the other day who talks about God's holiness is actually, it's a relational aspect. We think of holiness often as separation. That's the classic kind of sermon description. God's holy, that means he's separate from us. But actually, it's both ways. It's that the fact he is holy is the basis of his relationship with us. Because he's pure, we are not, and yet he brings us to him. Yeah, so anyway, as a theologian, he described it much better than that.
I get the gist of it.
The point is that holiness is not simply God is so far away we can never reach him. It's actually that he manifests himself to us as holy in relationship with fallen humanity.
Yeah.
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 Okay, so you get this job at PRTS.
Yeah.
And was it hard to leave the school system? It seems like very different jobs that you had, because there you're working with children, I presume,
Yeah.
for the most part,
Yeah.
or young adults.
So it's a K-4.
Oh, okay, so they were
elementary
children.
school. Yeah. Yeah. Very young. Yeah.
And I can imagine that there's great reward in seeing young minds begin to understand and speak and write Chinese.
Yeah. Chinese is so different from English. So I'm not advertising for any immersion program, but or even for learning Chinese. But it's so different from English. Research has shown, I don't know how accurate this research is, that it will develop different parts of your brain. For
English or other, let's say, the so-called Romance languages.
Right. Yeah, and I do see a difference in children after they're learning Chinese. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Your students were all different backgrounds, or were they also like Chinese parents that wanted their children to have Chinese reinforced?
All kinds of backgrounds.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of brain changes are you talking about?
Yeah. So,
Like, because I'm thinking about my 3 kids, and I'm wondering.
Yeah. Do they speak a second language?
They do. Their mom,
Portuguese?
they all speak Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
My wife has been very good about only speaking Portuguese to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've noticed that kids become more active when they're doing some mental work. Like, you need to come up with a solution for things and stuff. And also, because I taught Chinese immersion class in the first year, at least the first year I taught there. So you're forcing them, because I only spoke Chinese with them. I don't speak English. So you're forcing their brain to work, even when they don't want to work. Sometimes, you're just, I'm tired, I don't want to work. But you have to at least know what I'm asking you to do, even though you would say, no, I don't want to do it. So you're forcing their brain to work harder than in the English setting. Yeah. And then they have to practice writing Chinese. They have to practice recognizing the Chinese characters. So that, Chinese characters are very pictorial, right? So that, I think, would help their brain, the art part of their brain, to work harder. Yeah. So it's just very interesting. Yeah.
This is very interesting to me, because I actually saw an interview the other day with a former CIA guy who was describing how in the CIA they learn languages, which is actually they don't want to be perfectly fluent because that arouses suspicion.
Oh, okay.
For example, if I was walking around in, what's the name of your city again?
Chongqing.
If I was walking around Chongqing and I had a perfect accent as if I was from, name another part of, like, what's a city up in the Northeast?
Beijing.
So, right. So if I had a perfect Beijing dialect, and you think he's a tall white guy with an absolutely flawless accent from the southeast of Beijing, there's something wrong. You think he's a spy.
Oh, wow.
So in the CIA, they don't do that on purpose.
Okay.
They develop, I forget the name of it. It's like a functional fluency, and so they don't learn by words like cat, dog,
right.
Mug, because words don't ever exist like that. They exist in sentences, context. Yeah. So that's all me leading to a next question, which is that also the way that you teach the children? Because if you stand up in front of a classroom of kids and they've never heard Chinese,
Right.
and you just start speaking Chinese.
Yes.
How in the world do you get them
Yeah.
to understand?
Yeah. So I taught third grade in my first year, but the immersion program actually starts from kindergarten. So when the kids come in kindergarten, they have no former exposure to Chinese. So the kindergarten Chinese teacher would only talk Chinese to them. So because in kindergarten, you don't have a lot of content or abstract content to teach them. So whatever you want them to do, like line up, you can gesture it and you can use your body language to help them understand. But the teacher would only talk in Chinese. But so over the 1 year, in 1 year, they would learn the basic functional Chinese. Yeah, that's how they learn the whole thing. Then they would start to mimic you. They would start to say the same thing back to you. So that's the kindergarten phase. And then they go to first grade. There will be more abstract content to learn in first grade, but they're already immersed in Chinese for a whole year, and then they're good to go. Yeah.
This immersion program, because I don't think, we just moved here from England, so our kids' schooling experience has been 100% British until we moved back here.
Yeah.
Then we heard about the Spanish immersion, and now you're telling me Chinese.
Yeah.
Is every class taught in the target language? Or they also get some instruction in English?
Yeah, so the Chinese immersion program that the school that I worked in, the setup was 50%. So 50% of the time that was spent in the Chinese classroom. So half the day. So we have two groups that we would swap around noon. So the morning English class will go to the afternoon Chinese class. Morning Chinese will go to the afternoon English. So each grade, we have two groups of students who would do this Chinese immersion thing. And the rest of the grade, 3 other classes, they're general English class. They don't do the Chinese immersion. Yeah. So we have 2 different kind of categories.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But
are we good? Oh, sorry, I saw hands waiting. It's like, oh no.
The Spanish immersion from the school district that Forest Hills, they have 100% Spanish immersion. So they would be in the Spanish immersion class all day. They would actually take some English class, like starting maybe from 2nd or 3rd grade even, not in the kindergarten or 1st grade. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Their Spanish is amazing.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
What about the Chinese though? Where are you happy with the level the students would get to?
So that's the tricky part, because actually Spanish is a much easier language to learn than Chinese, and it's more similar to English than Chinese. So for the Spanish immersion, they have 100% of Spanish time, but for the Chinese immersion, they only get 50%. So first grade or kindergarten, 1st grade, even 2nd grade, they're still okay. But starting from 3rd grade, you can tell that the content or their development level, like the things they want to say, they don't have the words, or the language capacity isn't catching up with their mental development or power. So you can tell it's becoming trickier the older they get.
Yeah. So I just wanted to tap into or touch on the work experience you had there, because I'd love to compare that with the work that you were doing at PRT. What was your first day like, getting the job and walking into PRTS? It's a vastly different context. Not just the fact that Forest Hills is just it's a public school system, right? It's a secular based.
Yes.
And now you're walking into a confessionally reformed work environment.
Yeah.
And it's a place of learning still, and yet for older students now.
Right.
And the topic is very focused versus broad-based learning. And the type of work you're doing is very different. So what was day one like for you?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I actually got hired by Puritan halfway through my study. So I started there as a student. No, at Puritan. at Puritan Reformed.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we didn't touch on that. So you were getting a master's degree at Puritan?
Yeah, after graduating from MSU, that summer I applied to study at Puritan, and then I was accepted as a student. So,
And what degree were you going for?
MAR, so Master of Arts in Religion, focusing on systematic theology. Yeah. So halfway through my study, I got hired to do full-time job. So the secular or public school system that I was in, the teachers, they were working so hard there. I see their heart for the students and but the whole fundamental principle of understanding of human, like their anthropology, is just a false perception. Like their understanding is that you are good, you're created good, like you're not a sinner, but you're good. So just make a good choice today. If you failed yesterday, okay, today you make a good choice. So it's that constant encouragement for students to make a good choice. That doesn't work because we're not good. We're sinners. We're fallen sinners. So we don't have that ability to so-called make good choices or be kind to others, be patient from ourselves. We need God. We need hope. We need a savior, not just hope, but we need to be delivered from sin. So that's that foundation is just wrong. So that's the public school system that I worked in. But then, Puritan, I loved it. When we would have a prayer time every morning, I loved it. Like we would pause in the middle of the work and then go to the Lord in prayers. And then we have a chapel message every Wednesday that all faculty and staff can go to. It's amazing that when you are working, you sense that you need God's help and grace and mercy, and then you can stop and meditate on His word. It's amazing. I appreciate that a lot. Yeah.
So from day one, it was a big change for you.
Yeah.
What about coworkers? When you were brought into PRTS, what was the actual job? Was it just to work on the lectures? Like why did they feel like they needed to fill this particular role? What was it for?
So when I got hired in the first place, I think my job had two components. One is to translate the lectures, and the second is to develop an ESL course, a theological English course. I actually taught that course the summer. I think I developed a curriculum because that was my master degree from MSU. It's teaching and curriculum. So I designed a curriculum for the theological English enhancement course, we call it. And then, so that was what I was working on in the first 1 or 2 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then now it shifted to translation and the biblical counseling program. I'm helping our director in the counseling program.
With the biblical counseling program?
Yeah.
What's that work look like?
So help set up courses or communicating with students and professors.
Is this a new course for PRTS?
This is a new program that we launched last fall. So this fall is going to be the second year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And have you started bringing students in for that program?
Yeah.
Okay, so
last
it's online.
Fall, yeah.
Not meaning like on the internet, but it's going. It's going.
Yeah. It started last fall. We launched it last fall, and then we had our first so-called cohort of students. Okay. Yeah, and more students are coming this summer too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to transition to the Chinese church, because the work that you're doing at PRTS presently and that you were doing before with the transcriptions and the lectures, I'm assuming it's not just for Chinese-speaking students at PRTS, but actually you are trying to get these lectures and now books through the translation work back to Chinese readers in China. Well, I guess also throughout the world, wherever they might be, right, with the online access.
Right.
But what's the end goal for these lectures, for the translation work that you're doing with lectures and books and everything?
Right. So for the Puritan Reformed part, we do hope to eventually have an MA in Chinese. So to have all the courses in the MA program being translated and subtitled and dubbed into Mandarin Chinese. So people can take it online even in China or somewhere even outside China, but outside the US. So that's for the Puritan side. And then for the Old Past Translation Fellowship, we realize this has been our burden for our Chinese group here for years, because we realize, like, soon after we are here, we realize we're sitting on this big pile of wealth of Christian literature here, Reformed, biblical, sound literature that is so lacking in China. People are so hungry. They want spiritual food. And then we realize we have it, a lot of them here, but they're not translated into Chinese, and people in China have no access to them. So that's the burden we have had for years, and then finally we established this fellowship. So eventually we want to translate more and more literature, Christian literature, for Christian living, like how to now have become a Christian. Now what? How do I live to glorify God? How do I live a Christian life? How do I walk this pilgrimage on earth? They need a lot of literature on that. Yeah. Anything you have, they're like, we want it. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess there's so many choices, and you have to prioritize in terms of types of Christian literature.
Yeah.
So here at RHB, for example, we have the devotional works, we have the contemporary authors. We, we've got Paul Tripp and Paul Washer and Sinclair Ferguson and on.
Yeah.
With Joel Beakey.
Yeah.
But we also have, we call them the old dead guys, right? Like the John Owens, the Thomas Bostons, Thomas Goodwin, and onwards.
Right.
What's the situation like? Well, I have a question after this, but what's the situation like in China in terms of accessibility for those, for these different genres of works? I guess textbooks would be another one. I know we have the Bible in Chinese.
Right.
Outside of the Bible, what's the landscape look like?
Right. So there have been a few officially published, like from publishers, books that have been published in China, but overall it's hard to publish a Christian book in China, like a hard copy. I think a lot of regulations and restrictions on religious content.
Because there's publication that could happen in China itself, but then there's publication that can happen outside.
Right.
So are there different levels of difficulty and complexity for either situation? Accessibility-wise,
you mean? Like how they can access those material? Yeah, if they are published in China, I'm sure you can buy it through different means. Okay. But for example, if it's a book that's published in the U.S. by a U.S. publisher, it's more difficult to
There's going to be a lot of scrutiny on those books.
Yeah, and even more expensive, much more expensive. And then some people don't even know how to get it. Like they have no idea how to get it.
Right. So you've got issues with distribution, with economics.
Right.
Can people even afford it?
Right.
With content, and I'm assuming the powers that be in China aren't necessarily favorable towards some of the things that, like, for example, could you get Calvin's Institutes?
Yeah, actually, I mean,
Because of the content, it'd be okay.
I mean, that one has been already translated in China and published by a Chinese publisher.
Okay.
So last time I checked, you can still buy them, but things change quickly. So I don't know if it's still accessible now.
So
Yeah.
I'm just throwing curveballs at you.
Yeah,
You may
that's
not know
fine.
the answer, but so then what about something like what Paul Washer is the preeminent Christ that was just published, which is going to be very gospel centric.
Right.
Would that pass regulation?
That you just have to try and see, and then, yeah. But first you have to have a publisher who wants to do this, and then
In China,
and then to submit maybe that to have the government or to check if they allow it. So yeah, a lot of uncertainty. Yeah.
And it's not like there's boxes you can check to be like, okay, if we meet these criteria, we know we can get it published. It's really fairly subjective process.
I don't know if you submit your application to the government, if they have like boxes they check, or it's more subjective process of screening. So I don't know how they work there. So that's why for our OPAS Translation Fellowship, we just want to distribute them electronically, free of charge. So people will just have access to them. Instead of printed book. That's very difficult.
Okay, so that's very interesting, because I could imagine that the willingness, or let's say better, the prioritization of resources that you and your committee or other groups of Chinese translators, when you're evaluating, okay, what are we going to translate, or you translate and you translate? We only have so much time.
Right.
You have limited resources in terms of number of translators.
Right.
You also have a difference in quality of translators.
Yes.
So there's some, the more I think about it, this sounds very, very hard, but you also have to wonder, okay, we're going to put all this work into translating something. I don't know if John Owen's entire works have been translated into Chinese. Let's say, for sake of the argument, they haven't. Let's say they haven't. Or let's think of Thomas Goodwin, which is more recent.
Yeah.
So I doubt that's been fully translated into Chinese. But it's a massive undertaking, and there's no guarantee, number one, it'll pass the regulators. Number two, that there will even be a market for it in China. So yeah, I could see how it makes sense that you would be focusing on the electronic. However, what roadblocks present themselves for that route as well? I mean, from my limited understanding, what I hear about China is that they even have control and censorship over the internet there.
Yeah.
So how do you get it in?
Yeah, so...
And if it's anything that's going to get in trouble, you don't have to talk about it.
We haven't had, like, for the book that we did translate, Developing a Healthy Prayer Life, we haven't had any trouble distributing that.
And that's been all electronic?
Yeah, so just electronic form. We made the PDF form, but then another publisher in Hong Kong, actually, they made it into... what's the more professional format of a book, e-book?
Yeah, like an e-book.
Yeah.
Kindle or a reader.
EPUB? Or is it called?
EPUB.
Yeah. EPUB. Yeah, EPUB. So they actually made that into EPUB format and put it on their website with our permission. Also, yeah. So we didn't have any problem with it, with distributing those things. And we share it with others and ask them, share it with others. Yeah. Yes, you please. Yeah. So we see this as a route that's that can reach more people. than other routes. Yeah. Maybe one day this route will be blocked too, and then we maybe need to figure out another way to do it. Yeah.
I remember reading as a kid biographies of Bible smugglers.
Yes,
in,
yes.
Communist Russia and China.
Yeah.
They were so fascinating. Like the determination. One route gets blocked or shut down. A batch of Bibles gets captured and burned or whatever. But okay, we'll find another way.
Yeah. You just keep finding ways. Yeah.
But what is the motivation for you and let's say your other translators with the knowledge in the back of your mind that this may not come to fruition? This book may get banned, blocked, prevented, and I will have spent so many days of my life working really hard on this. And for you, it's as a side project.
Yeah.
This isn't your full-time job.
No.
I'm assuming you don't get paid for this work.
No, not at all.
So what's the motivation then?
We see the hunger there, and then in God's providence that we have been brought here to Grand Rapids and have seen all the resources that's here. That's enough evidence for us to know that this is a work that we need to do. We leave the result to God. Even if after like 2 years, we're working 2 years on a project and then it didn't come to fruition, it's okay. That result is in God's hand. It's not in vain. Those 2 years wouldn't be spent in vain. So the value of the work, we want to be faithful to God and then use our talent, knowledge, whatever He has granted us to serve. And then the result really is in His hand. Yeah.
Speak a little bit more about this group at Heritage Reformed. We talked a bit about it earlier.
Yeah.
At our last year when we talked, but how many people is it, and what's the vision for? Like, where would you like to see this grow to?
Are you talking about the translation group or the? So we don't have people in there as members or so. We just, let them know we have this translation fellowship and encourage them to come participate in the training sessions, because a lot of the people are already doing some translating works or interpretation work for our church, because every Sunday morning we would have an interpreter do live interpretation of the sermon, and some of the people from the Chinese group, they would go to the English sermon and then have a headphone on with the interpretation going on there. So some of them are already doing this kind of job. Then they want to learn more about translation. So we encourage, and then we would share with them, like, look at all those resources we have here. We're so rich. What can we do to help our brothers and sisters in China? We have been given so much. What can we give to serve the Lord and them? So we encourage them, and they responded like very actively. They want to learn more. So they have been faithfully in coming to those training sessions. All 4 sessions, each time is 3 to 4 hours. So 3 to 4 hours of translation training. It's very heavy work. They're all taxed in there mentally every time. But they have been joyfully and faithfully coming. So it's really a blessing to see that.
This group, I'm assuming, is all Chinese.
Yes.
And all from China originally?
Yeah, there was actually a Malaysian student who came to the last 2. He heard about it in the second training session. He just graduated and he's going back to Malaysia to serve, but he's of Chinese descent, so he speaks Chinese, and he said he's going to do some Chinese translation work in Malaysia too. Yeah. So he came for training, but the majority of them are Chinese who are born and raised in China. Yeah.
Do you know of any other groups like yours throughout the U.S. or elsewhere?
I do know there are other translation fellowships or groups. I don't know if they do trainings like we do, but they have like Reformed Translation Fellowship, so I know they have an online database. They have translated a lot of works too. So this can go back to one of your questions, or what you were wondering about, what books do you choose to translate?
Yeah, how do you prioritize what's the next book to work on?
So we first check if there has been a translation already. We don't want to reduplicate the work. And then see if we can get a copyright permission from the publisher to translate that book. And then see if it's needed in China. Like, we would contact people that we know in China, brothers and sisters, and see if they would be interested in reading that. Yeah.
What it seems to me that this is such an incredible opportunity for the Chinese church to create these resources, to translate these resources. And that's not to disparage whatsoever the faithful Christian theologians who are in China, and hopefully they're writing as well, and creating works.
Yeah.
But even if we at RHB didn't speak the same language as the Puritans did, we would still want to read it.
Right. Definitely.
Right? So which is why we have, not just we at RHB, but let's say that the Puritans and those of that lineage have such an audience in places like South America and Korea, and sounds like there's a thirst and a hunger in China as well. And yet it sounds, take this gently, but you're just a couple people.
Yeah.
And there's too much. Translation is hard work.
Yes, it is.
I mean, the only translating I've done is like from Greek and Hebrew and Latin, well, and German and French.
Oh, that's a lot.
But not whole books, just little snippets here and there.
Yeah.
And it's hard and tedious, and I didn't like it.
No.
And I mean, it's rewarding for sure, and it had its purpose. But that's what I'm getting to is it had its purpose. I mean, mine was in the context of academia and needing to complete a degree, and but at the end of the process, there was this great reward in, like, okay, it's kind of like digging for gems, as it were. You know, you're presented with this bare earth, which is the original language. Let's say German, because that was the hardest. And you're digging into that earth and you're unearthing gems, but it takes a lot of work. But at the end of that process, you emerge with these beautiful things. And beyond that beautiful thing, it's that beautiful thing goes into this larger body of, or this larger thing that we call purpose, which in my case was just to achieve this degree, right? For you and the others working on this, the purpose is the proliferation and the nurture or nourishment of Christ's church in a land where it faces way more opposition than it does here, or at least of a different type of opposition. And it has so historically for a long time. I don't really know if I have a question here for you, except to say that it sounds like that purpose is worth facilitating, however possible. And I just wish people would, I hope that this podcast or other things brings awareness to the work that you all are doing. And I think you and I talked last year a bit about how at some point you're hoping to get donations and be able to support the work in whatever way you can. Right. But it's almost like there's this balance, right? It's like you could get all this money in, hopefully, and yet you don't have enough translators yet. Right.
So to be able to translate theological content or Christian content, it requires a even higher proficiency.
the normal translation.
Yeah, because you're adding the content restrict to it.
Explain that. I don't fully understand that. The content restrict.
Yeah. So, for example, if you ask me to translate legal documents, I won't be able to do it because I don't know the jargons. I don't know the legal context. I don't have much knowledge about law, so I won't be able to do it. You need people who have been trained in law, or at least be very, very familiar with that discipline to be able to translate those content.
Okay. So versus just translating like a popular book.
Right, exactly.
That's very accessible.
Yeah. How to be a good friend. Stuff like that. Yeah. So for theological content, you need someone who is trained, who have been trained or very familiar with theology to be able to do it. So imagine a translator who have gone through all those training and education to do this. And like you said, it's very taxing. I can do like maybe at most 4 hours of translating every day. Then my brain wouldn't be able to function anymore. I have to do something else because that's the limit for them to be able to do this full time and support themselves. They have been prepared to do this with all those education. We need to have a better support system for them to be able to make a living out of it. But now we're only training. We're just starting to train translators. Hopefully in the future, if someone is doing this full time, they're devoting all their time to do this, we will be able to make some compensations. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would imagine that, especially for Chinese men wanting to enter the ministry, sure, okay, they may have, limited capabilities with translation. So they're already doing it in their head, as it were, to get the education.
Yeah.
They have the theological training.
Yeah.
But their goal isn't to be a translator.
No.
So
no.
That makes it even harder. Like you're limiting your pool of possible qualified translators.
Yes. I'm really excited. We have this sister in Christ coming this fall to Puritan. She's coming here to do a master in religion. Maybe I don't know which area she's focusing on. But the purpose of her coming here to do theological training is to become a better theological translator. That's the first one I've ever known a person who wants to get trained in theology to be able to translate theological content. So imagine all those trainings, you have to be fluent in both languages. And then I remember someone said, what other jobs? You can do a lot of other jobs that pays much higher than what people are making as a translator. So we really need to help them to be able, they want to do this. They see the value in doing this. They see you are translating so satisfying content, enriching content. They want to be able to do this, but you also want to be able to support you or your own family too. So
yeah. With the advent of AI, is this a positive? Do you think that this could be a way to accelerate the translation process to where you may just need on the front end? Well, from a management perspective, you'll need someone to make that decision. Hey, we're going to translate Owen first and then Goodwin, or Beakey first and then Paul Washer. And as well, someone who understands how to prompt well the AI. And then on the back end, you'll need, of course, a good editor.
Right.
And the distribution channels and all that. But that middle segment, the really hard part that we're talking about right now, can potentially the AI could pick up a lot of the grunt work.
Yeah. There have been a few very good machine translation
already done.
AI like Chat GPT. is one, and then DeepL, they do a very good job
of translation,
of doing machine translation. They do need heavy. So theological content is very difficult to translate. The more humane the discipline is, like it's a humanity discipline, than scientific discipline. So the more human elements in that content is, the more difficult it is for machine to translate it. But ChatGPT and DeepL, they can help big time, but still need a lot of heavy post editing. But to be able to edit, you need to be very advanced in translation. You can't just find someone who just speaks Chinese or is born and raised in China to do the editing job. So you would need that editor to be able to detect all the errors or mistakes that the machine translation has done. So there is no avoiding that part of the work and then just become a good editor. You have to go through all that to become a good editor. So maybe in the future, like the AI can help with the bulk of the work if they do a better job doing the draft translation. But you still need a lot of good editors. Yeah, especially those theological content.
Yeah. I'm tempted to jump on ChatGPT right now and test it.
Yeah, I tested it.
You have?
With, a few passages. They did pretty well.
From what?
From one of our lectures.
Oh, from the lecture?
Yeah. I want to test it to see how well it does, and what's the difference between that and DeepL and maybe Google translation. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been playing around with it quite a bit and trying to compare the Bard, which is Google's, which is amazing, and then ChatGPT 4 is the version I've been using. And there's some very noticeable differences, but it's we're still so early in this whole process. And I think it's gonna be pretty amazing what happens from here. But especially for things like, if we think about how can the church, how can Christ's church, how can we utilize these tools, which is ultimately what they are, in the same way that social media has been used to, well, for much horrible bad, but also some very, very good in terms of like gospel good.
Yeah.
But this idea of using AI to speed up the translation process and hopefully enable more and more. So I just even think of our catalog at RHB. It's so many different books.
Right.
Not all of them would need to be translated into Chinese, but a lot of those would be probably years of work for someone just to plug away at day in and day out.
Yeah. And also for content that you would need to skim through, so those would be perfect for machine translation. Just get the basic idea of it.
Yeah.
But for something that you would want to stop and ponder and meditate on, I think a better translation is needed than machine. Yeah.
So where would you ideally like to see your work at PRTS and the work with the Chinese translation group? Do you envision these coalescing at some point, or are you happy with them continuing as they are? But what's the end game for you? Where would you like to see that translation group end up in terms of people trained? How big is your dream with that group, but also with the work that you're doing at PRTS?
Right. I do think they complement each other. I'm happy to like just the way they are, but if in the future, in God's providence, there is any opportunity we can cooperate, that would be great. But like, for example, this a girl who's coming this fall to be trained in theology, if after graduation or during her time here, she can start working or, first getting trained in translation, but then start working for the fellowship or start working on some book projects. And then we need good translators at the seminaries projects too, so she can help in that way. So we can complement each other. And the people who are trained in the fellowship in translation, they can help with the seminaries projects too if it's needed, and they're competent to do those jobs. So it's all for the same goal, either for theological training or for Christian living materials.
So then, if you had someone step in and take your present role at PRTS, and someone who's able to do what you're doing with the group, and you are completely liberated, and you had unlimited budget, what would you be doing?
That's a very good question. I have 2 dream ministries. One of them is I used to view or vision it as having a radio station, but now you can do it in podcast form for people in China, for especially unbelievers in China who are suicidal or who need help, as like a hotline podcast for them, so they can dial in and they can call, and then for a set time in the day that they can connect and then talk to them, share the gospel. Is this a big
problem in China? Suicide?
I mean, it's in every country, but in China too.
You feel like this would be something you would want to spend your time on?
Because they need. I mean, where would they go for help and hope? Because they couldn't find it anywhere outside Christ. But so for them to have a place to go and tell their stories, tell their struggles, and then to bring the gospel to them in that form, because they're desperate. They're not like, my life is all good, I don't need anything else. They're desperate. You might be the last person they would talk to if they really wanted to commit suicide. So that. And then another dream ministry is, I have a huge burden in my heart for those orphans or those children who are left behind by their parents in those rural areas in China. Sometimes not because their parents abandoned them, because their parents went to the big cities to work, so they can support them or whatever. But there were a lot of kids just left behind with sometimes the better situations that they have like a grandpa with them. Sometimes they had non-adults at home. It's just them. So for all those kids, like if we can do something for them.
Is child trafficking a big issue in China?
I don't know about now because of all the surveillance installed on our streets, though I'm sure those can prevent a lot of those child trafficking, but it used to be a big problem. Imagine that sometimes that family only has one child, and then that child was, kidnapped, and then some of the parents they spend all their time just going everywhere to look for their children. It's heartbreaking. But thinking about those children left behind, they just crave an adult to be with them and help them. They're children. They're so vulnerable and helpless.
What's interesting about your response is that both of these dreams, I think, require being in China. Maybe not the podcast. You could do that from anywhere. But at the same time, I could see the value of being in China for that type of an outreach.
Mm-hmm.
The orphans, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you could oversee it from here, I suppose. Yeah. Is that ultimately where you'd, if you could, like to be, is back in China?
I'm thinking about the orphans or that ministry to have a network, because one person is too, it's just a drop in the bucket. And they need people spend time with them, not just to go there, visit them for a week and then leave. China actually have a lot of like volunteers who would go in the summer, like college students or whatnot. They would go in the summer to volunteer to teach them at a school or whatever, and then they would leave. But for those children, it's so hard for them because they crave adult companionship, and then all these people come and go. So for that ministry, it's more having a network of people committed to spend long time with them or regularly go visit them to be stable. So I don't think I can do that by myself, but more to have a whole network of doing it. Yeah.
I visited India years ago. I think I was, 24. And we were working with orphans, some orphanages, and just hanging out with the kids, doing little Bible studies, and like painting, those kind of like short-term missions.
Yeah.
But we did go out into this very rural area, and there was a house there where they had, I think it was 12 Burmese children. So, all of these children, their parents had been killed, like horrible stuff, because there was a civil war happening, I think, in Burma at the time. But I remember as we drove away from that little house, and I remember walking in, there was no electricity inside. The kids were just in rags, and they all kind of slept in the same room together. And there was a kitchen, smaller than our studio, this house. And there was a like house director, very faithful Christian Indian man, and the kids sing this beautiful hymn for us. I don't even remember what it was. See, you remember the cereal, and I remember the MacArthur interview. I can't remember the song they sang. Anyway, as we were driving away in the truck, the four of us, we were all just American kids from the same broadly evangelical church in LA. And I don't know what triggered it. I mean, it's not like one of us started, but we all just started like weeping, because we knew what we were leaving behind. And I was literally like that close to just saying, I'm staying. Just stop the truck. I'm going to stay and just be there for these kids. And it's strange. I think back on that memory only when it's recalled for me in conversations like this. And there's still that part of me that thinks, come on, Tav, why didn't you just stay? Like, why didn't you just stay? I don't know. But the thing that hits me the hardest is that they were just one tiny little house out of probably thousands. Given the size of India, I could only imagine that there's probably thousands of little homes like that with one faithful man and his wife, or maybe it's just a faithful woman or a faithful man who's taking care of these kids that they lost their parents somehow, or who knows how they got there. And you don't know about them. I don't know about them. We have no idea. And they're just making it happen day by day.
Yeah.
And and it's not, I wouldn't say it's kind of like that savior complex where it's like, oh, me, the Americans going to come in and save the day. It wasn't that at all. No. It was just, I saw a need and I thought, I can lift things and I can cook kind of better now than in my 20s, and I can communicate better with my network back in the U.S. to maybe get more support. But
you just moved with compassion.
Just totally moved. But it took me going there. It wasn't just videos or pictures. And like I had to be there and look those kids in the face, you know. So
yeah, it's so heartbreaking. I remember sometimes the kids, the first thing they would ask a visitor is, when are you leaving? Because they've had it happen so many times. That like, when are you leaving?
Yeah. Or no, the worst, not the worst, but even harder was, are you coming back? Like, when are you coming back? And then they start calling you Papa or all these, like, oh man. Yeah. See, you made me cry on my podcast. I've never done that before.
No? Wow. I feel very honored. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something that I'm glad you said that's part of your dream. Because, this whole conversation, we've been so lost in like, got to get theologically rich materials out to them, got to give them stuff to read, got to give them stuff to... Yeah, we absolutely do. That's really important. I mean, that's why RHB exists, is to provide resources. But the very best resource of all is another spirit-filled person, like a human being that's there with those kids, whether the kids are saved or not. They need that human touch. They need that godly instruction, the role model. I mean, you can only get so much. I know this because someone very close to me never knew their dad, their father. And so their conception of God is colored by that. Yeah. And they would admit that.
Yeah.
And, or even of those of us that have had parents, my understanding of God is colored because of who my dad was for good and for bad, and who my mom was for good and for bad.
Yeah.
And so you can read all, like, if I gave these Burmese kids books about God as our Father, hopefully they would learn something very valuable from that. But they need a real father too. They need a real human being who's there with them that hopefully in more ways than not can exemplify what a good, loving father looks like. Anyway, I don't know why I just told you all that story, but I think it's because I really resonated with what you said about that surprised me. Your answer surprised me. I thought you were going to say, oh, if I had all the money in the world, I would start a nationwide hub of translation groups that were, confessionally reformed, kind of like that should have been your answer.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, and I'm glad you didn't answer that way, because you're being honest with me about where your heart lies.
Yeah.
And it sounds like much more hands-on.
Yeah.
So it's not just, I'm going to make these books and then they're going to go where they're going to go, and you have no contact with those people. Maybe with the publisher, but the thousands or millions by God's providence, if you read those works, you'll never meet them. But if you were actually speaking to people on a hotline or ministering to kids, even if you were overseeing that kind of an effort, you're still going to go and participate in some way.
Yeah.
So your answer surprised me in a good way.
I've had those two dream ministries. From the first year I became a Christian. The translating part came later. I didn't know how the Lord will use me. And then he surprised me as bringing me to this translation job. I liked it. I love languages. I have always loved languages. And then it's amazing to see how he uses whatever abilities or talents he gave me to do things for him and for his people. But those two dream ministries have always been in my heart ever since I became a Christian.
Yeah.
He is the light. It's so dark for especially those two groups of people, like the Indian children you mentioned. I was thinking they had this a Christian man and his wife helping them, at least planting gospel seeds. Yeah. And then I'm thinking about, as you were talking about them, I see lights in their dark skies. Mm-hmm. But then I'm thinking about other kids who are also in darkness, but none of those gospel lights were there for them to at least point them to the sun. So yeah, they need the light. Yeah, the light. That's the only light. So yeah.
Well, it sounds like what you're doing is quite comprehensive then, because I mean, if God gave you these dreams, you know, which maybe we should call them goals for the future, that'll happen in His timing.
Yeah.
You know, if He wills.
Yeah.
In His sovereignty. Yeah. Then in the present, He has you doing what is really foundational for that. Mm-hmm. Because if people are being reinforced and grown in their faith mm-hmm. through excellent readable resources, mm-hmm. or the pastors who are reading these and then disseminating that to their congregations in China,
yeah,
then I can only imagine that this work you're doing now will lend itself quite readily to
absolutely
a transition at some point in the future.
Yeah. They can talk to people on the street, right? Like,
right.
need help.
Right.
And then, yeah.
Thank you for coming and
thank you for having me.
Sharing so much wealth of experience from your own life and the work you're doing at PRTS. It's really a privilege, I think, for me to sit here and talk to you at such a nascent, early stage in what's happening. Because as you confessed, you haven't translated a book. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've done a lot of translation work, and yet your goal with this group is to get into those books and get more than just not that the lectures are anything minor, but there's all these different forms of media mm-hmm. that it sounds like the Chinese Christians mm-hmm. are very, very hungry for.
They are. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so encouraging to hear. And it makes me kind of sad too for us as American Christians who have, it's so accessible, it's so easy, and we're not, some of us are, but most of us aren't reading all of these works that, we just take it for granted, unfortunately, not realizing how much work is involved, not just for us here at RHB to bring up things to publication and distribution, the huge amount of work that goes into that, but then this whole other step of, for Chinese, for example, getting it translated and getting it distributed and getting it out there. And it's looking at you, it seems as though there's an enormous burden on your shoulders. Would that be accurate for this type of work?
Yes, but then, like you said, we're only a few people, and then we just do our part. Like, we are limited, right? We're weak and limited and needy. We don't, like, I only can work a few hours in translation every day.
Does that frustrate you though? I mean, don't you wish you could work 12 hours a day on it and be like, I'm ready to go. I feel great.
It used to, but now not anymore. I feel it's great to accept, to see my own humanity.
So you've come to a point where you accept your limitations.
Yeah, and it's great because I am limited. I'm just beginning to see the reality of it clearer than before. So it's great. The Lord doesn't need me, right? He doesn't need any of us. He's just pleased to use us. And then I should be very content to use whatever He has given me, however much time, energy, ability, skills to serve Him. And then that should be satisfying for myself. Yeah, knowing I just need to be faithful. I don't need to be anything else. I just need to be faithful.
That's a good point to end on.
Thank you so much.
Giselle, thanks so much for coming by.
Thank you for having
You're local, so I'll make sure to get you over here again. And hopefully we can get some of the other translators over.
Yeah,
That would be amazing to
that'd be
talk to
great.
them.
Yeah.
But come back again soon, and we'd love to hear an update on how things are going for, well, the translation work, but also the two big dreams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.